everyone. So I'm going to do something a little different today, and I'm going to kind of build up a series on it. So for the remainder of the year, I'm going to look at specific concerns regarding return to in-person teaching and looking at ways to address those concerns through trauma-informed practices. So to begin this series, you can see I'm going to be focusing on mask wearing. I think this is an area, mask compliance is an area that brings up a lot of concern for people and is potentially like anxiety producing. So let's go ahead and start out with just providing some information about anxiety. So anxious brains make anxious choices, and what that means is that we're coming from a threat state. That's a very limiting place to be. That means that we're coming from a place where we might be in heightened alert and observing more threats in our environment that may or may not actually be there. That does is that limits our abilities to make objective decisions, and it limits our abilities to look at positive intent. And when we're not feeling safe. So when we are feeling safe, we're more likely to we're more likely to view situations as through the lens of positive intent. And I'll talk more about that when we get on to the next couple of slides. As I said earlier, I believe that this is a particularly anxiety-producing topic. Some of the concerns that come up is, what if students don't comply? What if I get sick? What if I get somebody else sick? What if I can't do my job the way that I want to effectively do my job? And so, starting out, the first step, I think, in recognizing our own anxiety is identifying the warning signs. What are some of the indicators that we're feeling worried or anxious? I think this is different for different people. I think some things that are pretty common are like sleep disturbances, so insomnia, memory issues, overthinking, rapid heart rate, irritability, physical symptoms. So maybe having like stomach issues or, having unexplained like aches and pains, as well as like avoidance and trouble concentrating. I think that you can use this as an indicator or a cue to take a deep breath, write that concern down, get it out of your head. That alone is a really helpful tactic when looking at anxiety. So once you have, or once you know the source of your school-related anxiety, you'll be able to focus more on managing these feelings. And this really leads us to identifying where we have control. I think that oftentimes when we're faced with uncertainty, we have about like two options that we can kind of look at. The first would be to work on increasing our certainty about a situation, so creating plans or structures to prepare for that. The other thing would be to learn how to tolerate that uncertainty. I think that's something that's kind of forgotten and not really thought about, is building up that tolerance and building up that resiliency to manage that anxiety. So again, we can address our anxiety by being prepared, creating plans, and also learning how to build up that resiliency to uncertainty and that tolerance to uncertainty. I think about this a lot. I think something that's like really tangible and something that made a lot of sense to me was like driving, right? I have control over things like my distractions, limiting my distractions. I have control over, my mirrors. I have control over putting on a seatbelt. I have control over my speed. And that makes me feel safer. But it's not 100% guarantee that I'm going to be safe. What I don't have control over is other people on the road. I don't have control over somebody cutting me off or somebody else's speed. And that's where I build up my tolerance. So on one hand, again, I have the preparedness. These are the ways I can keep myself safe in my space, what I have control over. On the other hand, I have to build up that tolerance to, this is a have to for me. I have to drive. So building up that tolerance to say, well, I can't be 100% sure that I'm going to be safe while I'm driving, but this is how I feel safer. Again, focusing on positive moments and what are some things that are working well for us. Practicing self-care and stress reduction. I think this is particularly important right now. All of us have been impacted. Right? All of us have endured some change or some loss, as we just talked about. And really having that grace to say that this is an unusual time and we have potentially limited access to some of our coping skills and some of our stress reduction techniques. So being able to build that up again and really spending time to make that important. moving forward, asking for support, avoiding burnout. I think this is really important. Looking at, I think that for many of us, we're leaders in the classroom, such as our teachers, leaders at our sites, such as our administrators, leaders in the district. And so I think in those situations, it's hard to ask for support and additional help. And so reminding ourselves that to take care of ourselves, to take care of our colleagues, to take care of our students, we really need to look at ourselves and be able to take care of ourselves first before we're able to do that. And that leads us into checking in with ourselves, asking yourselves, how am I feeling this morning? This is something that I do often with students. We're all kind of pick up some common occurring things that are happening for them. If they're feeling anxious, I might create a scale for them. You can do that with yourself and kind of create a scale, or kind of notice, gosh, I've been really tired this week. I've been really achy this week. I've noticed I've been more irritable this week, or whatever it is. Take note of that. And again, use that as an indicator to say, maybe I need to start taking care of myself. Maybe I need to add in some breaks into my day. So what I have here are some barriers and considerations. I think this is going to be particularly important to take into consideration. What are some of the things that our students and our staff are going to be coming in with, so that when we create plans, we have this information available to create a structure that's going to be more supportive. So, first looking at some of the barriers, we have lack of predictability and consistency, increased fear and anxiety, prolonged isolation. Last month, I talked about loneliness and how that really globally affects a person. Grief and loss, limited access to food and safe shelter, ongoing safety and security concerns. So potentially increased abuse, neglect, and exposure to violence. And on the other hand, what I have is considerations, and this might be more geared towards special populations, but also, again, keeping in mind that a lot of our students are coming back with, increased anxiety, increased loss, again, potentially some safety concerns. So some considerations might be that for students who have experienced abuse, they might be triggered by something covering their mouth, right? That restricted airflow, something touching their face. For students with sensory issues, they might not be able to tolerate the elastic around the ears, or again, the material over their face, or the smell of the material. So taking those things into consideration. Students who rely on facial expressions and lip reading to support communication, wearing a mask can restrict that. Students who experience anxiety might be triggered by the perceived restricted airflow. And then I think, again, it's really important to remember that for many of our students, they might not be accustomed to wearing masks. This might be something that's very unusual to them. They might not be going to stores or whatever where they have to wear masks. So just keeping those things in mind. And again, this goes back to kind of that positive intent. Rather than looking at a kiddo who's kind of refusing to wear their mask or wants to take it off or is messing with it, we might respond with that from our own anxious place of, oh my gosh, if you do that, you're going to get me sick, or whatever, you're going to make, whatever it is, that threat state. Again, kind of taking into consideration, maybe this kid is, this is the first time this kid is putting this mask on. Maybe this kid doesn't really know how to adjust this, or maybe this kid is experiencing some triggers from like a trauma or something like that. So what that does is it just gives us a little bit more empathy, and it helps us respond in a way that can be less harmful. So how can we help students adapt to wearing a mask from a trauma-informed perspective? Pushing information out early. So connecting with our caregivers, providing information and tips. This could be like an informative newsletter or something like that, that talks about what are some of the plans that have been created to keep kids safe in the classroom, that parents can share, or caregivers can share, providing tips for mask wearing at home, doing some role-playing mask decorating, these things like explaining in very age-appropriate ways how kids can practice wearing masks or why they wear masks. For myself, I have a 3-year-old son, and what we did to get him used to wearing masks when he had to return to his school was we would just place them on like stuffies for him. And so we would say like, okay, let's grab like, well, he has dinosaurs. So we would just get one of his little dinos and we would put the mask on there and we would talk about that. And then we would have him practice wearing the mask himself. It helped to kind of normalize that. We also provided language that we picked up from his school and use that language around the house. And that was really helpful for him with that transition. Practice using scripts and role-playing scenarios. This is at a site level. I think this is going to be so important. Again, you know, our kids are going to be coming in with kind of that heightened threat state. So paying attention to our body language, to our tone, to our posture, to sarcasm, all of those things are going to be super important. I recommend like role-playing, trying this out. You know, this is something that I did a lot in like grad school. I remember as a therapist, this is something that we would have to practice, you know, with our supervisors in the room, noting our body language and seeing how our clients were maybe responding to us. And so it's really important to keep those things in mind and get some feedback and be okay with that feedback. Again, that positive intent, being able to boost some of that empathy and recognize that potentially, you know, a kid isn't, if they're refusing to put a mask on, it's not coming from a place of willfulness, but it's coming from a place of potentially this is, again, the first time they're wearing a mask, or that it's really difficult to wear a mask, and coming up with language to address that. You know, one of the things that you could say could be something like, yeah, you know, yes, it is kind of difficult to wear a mask, or yeah, I was pretty nervous when I first had to wear it. It is, yeah, like I noticed I didn't really like it. It kind of hurts my ears when they wore it. What's that like for you? And the kid might respond in that way, like, yes, it hurts my ears or whatever, masks are dumb or whatever it is, right? But again, getting to their level, connecting with them, and coming up with solutions. You know, after I wore this mask the next day, I really didn't even notice it. What that does is that opens communication. It allows for, again, that positive intent. And it allows to really create that connection to say, okay, let's work on a plan together. So Josh, can you, thank you. Explain why. So use kid-friendly language broken down step by step. Again, keep in mind that this might be the first time that a kid is wearing a mask. So come up with things that are very slow and really breaking down the steps of putting the mask on and putting it on safely. Focus on safety and being a good friend to others, helping protect everyone. So using that language, use pictures to help normalize mask wearing. Some of the things that you can do could be like having like pictures of like doctors or anything like that, visuals in the classroom. You can take pictures of yourself with masks on. You can have pictures of like superheroes, any of those things, and that can even prompt conversations that you can have or discussions that you can have in the classroom to say, you know, like what superheroes can you name, or like what ninjas or whatever can you name that have these masks on? And if you were a superhero with your mask on, what would your superpower be, or whatever. But these are things that are just really set up to really normalize wearing masks, to see them in the classroom so that it's not something that's really scary for a lot of kids. Praise and reward. Some of the language that you can use would be, you know, thank you for being a safe friend. Thank you for letting me help you. Great citizenship. I think this is really true for all ages, is that, you know, even our high schoolers like praise. So that's pretty simple, a simple shift. Emotion reading practice. So create things instead of, you know, obviously instead of using like proximity, like hugs, those kinds of things, creating just hand gestures. I'll go into a script later on where I talk about like even being able to point to your nose, and that would mean, you know, lift up your mask so that it's covering your nose, or, you know, whatever welcoming gesture you could have. You can go to the next one, Josh. Thank you. What I have here is called an emotion reading practice. You know, again, I think back to some of our students who are going to be coming in with a ton of anxiety. And, you know, just this little bit, I think for some of our students who use facial reading, like facial expressions, as that coming from like a trauma response, like they had to learn that to be safe. That little bit of covering is going to be really exhausting for those students, and it's going to produce a lot of anxiety for those students, where that's a typical safety measure for them. So, something that you can practice in the classroom could be just explaining to students, we're capable of reading facial expressions from the eyes up. And staff can really spend just a couple of minutes a day practicing this. So you can have a student wear their mask, go in front of the class, express some emotion that they want to, or whatever silly face, and have students kind of try and guess what that silly face is or that emotion is. The other option could be putting a little mask on an emoji or a feeling chart. And then again, having students kind of pick out, like, what do you think that feeling is? We have this silly example that I see that a few people enjoy. But this is actually kind of a hard thing to do. And so really being able to have our students practice this and normalize it and get comfortable with it, what that is going to do is help reduce that anxiety and fear. And then what I have here are 2 scripts. These are just examples. The first one that you see in like the yellow area, that is just language that can be used to just explain why we wear masks. And then on the other side, that is just a quick script about like correction, so how to correct that. And I think that's a really important one. I was glad that I actually found that, because I think that's a great one. And so I'm going to go through them, and then you see the little link, and that's going to be available to everyone. But that link is about how to, through little videos, like teach kids to wear masks, and it goes through the range of the different age groups. So it has some specific videos for high schoolers, and then some specific videos for like elementary and middle. So I'm going to start with the first part. I'm just going to read them through so that you guys can hear them. In our classroom, we wear masks like you do when you're out in public with your family. Does anyone know why we wear masks? So you check for understanding and background knowledge. That's right. We wear masks to stay safe from germs and stay healthy. Another reason we wear masks is to be good friends. When we wear a mask, or when you wear a mask, you are keeping your friends healthy. Wave to a friend. Now say, I'm keeping you healthy. Have students wave to one another. There you go. In our class, we all work together. Sometimes the mask may feel a little itchy, or they might be too tight. Don't worry if that happens to you. Just let me or another teacher know, and we will help you get it right. So that's one way to say that. Again, this is totally adaptable, but it gives some language. The other way for the correction piece would be, remember that masks help keep our noses and our mouths safe. Sometimes the mask slips down below your nose. So if you see me point to your nose, that's a way to remind you to pull that mask up to hide your nose. You can remind me too. I love that it gave that correction of, you can go ahead and remind teachers, or you can remind, staff on board. So that's not a scary thing. If you get a little nervous about wearing a mask, that's okay. Staff are here to help you with that too. But so I think these are really great examples. And again, these are going to be available for everyone. And I highly recommend checking out the videos. I think they're super helpful. And again, that's even something that we can share with parents or guardians so that they can use some of that language to explain to their kiddos at home. Thanks, everyone.